First of all, Clement of Alexandria, in his Protrepticus, more or less conforming Christ to Orpheus, and that Christ is the new Orpheus singing the new song of salvation. That's very much his approach. A lot of people want to talk about Christianity as a mystery cult, and to understand the context of the competing cults when Christianity itself was one of these smaller type of cult movements with its own set of rituals and its own secret doctrines. And by secret doctrines, I mean simply doctrines that were only revealed to you after you underwent the initiation process. Yes, involves some sort of water rite or water magic, but sometimes something more, like an ascent to heaven or being anointed with oil. The late 1st and early 2nd century is really the height of the mystery cult movements. It's not way back in 5th century BC Athens. It's really important to know that Christianity is born when these other cults are at their most vibrant. If Christianity wants to compete as a Mediterranean religion, it needs to adopt and adapt. And what the Nicene preacher is able to do is to say, systematically go through the religious literature of other people and to say, that's really just a way of talking about Christ, who is the universal deity, the child of the human.
And today is the day. The course is now available. Link is in the description. And this is a 8-part course about mystery cults and Christianity. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. So we're not going to spoil too much of the course. So you're going to get a little taste of what's in this course, just summed up in 20 minutes, barely scratching the surface, not even touching the water of this iceberg. Basically, we're on top of the iceberg. We're not even going underneath. We're just going to look underneath the water and see what we can see from our eyes up here. And so with that being said, Dr. Litwa, the book of Mark is very secretive. No one knows who Jesus is. Don't tell him who I am. Baptism, things like that, getting initiated, the rites of the Eucharist. Is that something that you would look at and for the time period of the 1st century as a normal thing from mystery cults, or is this something way different? What do you think about that?
Well, I don't want to reveal too much, but I will say this. A lot of people want to talk about Christianity as a mystery cult or as highly dependent on a mystery cult. And what I think everybody needs as sort of intellectual preparation is to understand fully what a mystery cult is and to understand the context of the competing cults when Christianity itself was one of these smaller type of cult movements with its own set of rituals and its own secret doctrines. And by secret doctrines, I mean simply doctrines that were only revealed to you after you underwent the initiation process. Which, yes, involves some sort of water rite or water magic, and in most cases, but sometimes something more, like an ascent to heaven or being anointed with oil. I think when people think of mysteries, what Christianity has done is it has sort of intellectualized and made mysteries into sort of only cognitive elements. But it's important to keep in mind that cults were cults, that is, there are movements with real and embodied practices, and everybody is talking to everybody else. The late 1st and early 2nd century is really the height of the mystery cult movements. It's not way back in 5th century BC Athens. It's right in the period of Hadrian and Antoninus, which is that early 2nd century where we see the absolute height of interest in religion. And it's really important to know that Christianity is born when these other cults are at their most vibrant, not when people are anxious and when the empire is dying off. The empire is at its height. Mystery cults are at their height. So if Christianity wants to compete as a Mediterranean religion, it needs to adopt and adapt. to this amazing and colorful environment.
Wow, that's incredible. Now you mentioned that Emperor Hadrian had his own sort of religion, cult, mystery religion, and he had a boyfriend who died in Egypt, and they deified him. Can you explain that in comparison to something like Jesus being deified? Is there a way we can compare those two maybe?
Well, yes, the cult to Antinous, who is Hadrian's boyfriend, Antinous died in the Nile, and according to Egyptian belief, religious belief, if you died by drowning in the Nile, you became a special kind of spirit, and you were, in Greco-Roman thinking, made into a deity. And that's exactly what Hadrian did for Antinous. So Antinous isn't completely unique in terms of his being made a deity, but what happened is that Hadrian put all the funding behind it. And it's a great example of an innovative new cult emerging based on a deified hero and then popping up all over the Mediterranean world and competing with Christianity, so that Christians, when they mention this cult, have nothing but sneers and derision when they mention it, because they know it's so close to them. It's one of these newer cults. And it doesn't take the form of a mystery religion everywhere, but in some areas of Asia Minor and Greece, there were mysteries associated with Antinous. So when you talk about the development of religious phenomena, you have a situation where, yes, a religious movement can take on the character of a mystery cult movement, and it need not do that, but it was a popular form of religious experience and embodied religious life. So it's not surprising that it did.
So when we look at Antinous versus Jesus, we have in both cases we have someone who dies, he's mourned over, and then deified. And then now for the case of Antinous, I'm wondering, was there people who prayed to him as a deity that can answer prayers? Did he have power? Is there anything that, or was he just like, was it just a recognition type of thing? What do you think about that?
It's a full blown cult, and
Wow.
for a while, it's much obviously. I mean, it becomes part of the Roman state religion, and so yes, there's enough funding to build temples which survive today. There's enough funding to create a series of rituals, banquets, societies based on Antinous, um, and also literature based on Antinous. And as many of your viewers will know, hundreds and hundreds of statues which still survive. And these aren't just pictures; these are cult statues, so that they would receive veneration. Um, so just as you would pray to a saint today, yes, absolutely, you would pray to Antinous. Totally normal, and you would look to him for benefits. And this really did work. I mean, regardless of what your theory of religion is, whether the spirit of Antinous was really helping you, or whether you were just trying to live in a system in which you could receive more and more imperial funding, either way, you would be helped. And what's interesting is that the cult of Antinous survives past Hadrian. Okay, and that's very important because it's not just based on. I mean, it's not just based on one emperor's willy nilly desire. There is real devotion to Antinous that actually survives Hadrian.
Wow.
And so, yeah, for at least the next 50 years after Hadrian, the cult of Antinous is a very much of a thriving religion.
Is there any examples of someone in Christianity who was had an apotheosis that people might not know about today?
Well, I talk about in my book on Carpocrates, Marcellina, and Epiphanes. Epiphanes was officially deified by his parents. Epiphanes was a wunderkind, that is a 17-year-old philosopher genius who was also a Christian. He developed a theory of Christian communism and wrote a book called On Justice. And on a Mediterranean island, his parents set up what was called a museum for him, which is basically a library and a banquet hall. And every month there would be sacrifices to him, probably plant offerings on a local altar.
Wow.
So yes, absolutely. Christianity has many saints, which today would not be recognized as saints. And we need a good study of what a saint is, because in a sort of orthodox framework, you can have a saint and have a distinction between a saint and a god. But if you're in more of a Greco-Roman Mediterranean framework, there really isn't much, because if you have a being, who has immortal life, who can answer prayer, who can exert power on earth, and who has a sort of a superhuman body, then that being is a god, and is part of the vast hierarchy and pleroma of the gods. And that's very much what Christians meant when they referred to salvation as deification. If you get immortality and superhuman power, you are deified. That is, you are made into a god, because that's simply what a god is. And that is a very, very common understanding of salvation in the ancient Mediterranean world.
Wow. Now I want to get into this idea, because recently I was looking into the development of Christianity and the oldest images of Jesus that we have in these catacombs. And there was this catacombs, was one of the oldest that we have. And it's not just there was a lot. It's a Christian catacombs, but there's also images of Orpheus floating around in the area. How connected is the Orphic movement, the Pythagorean, Platonist, whatever that is, movement, and Christianity? And the reason why I asked that, we like that a lot of us think that Christianity just comes straight out of Judaism. But if I'm not mistaken, Judaism in the first century was starting to become Hellenized. And I just want to get your thoughts on all that. I threw a lot at you there, but just sorry about that.
No problem. That's just the very basics, though, right? Because if we had a time machine and we could go back and really get experience of the texture and the embodied nature of lived religion, Jews in antiquity, they wouldn't say that they were Hellenized.
Sure.
But you would see them speaking Greek. You would see them writing treatises in the name of Orpheus. And we have a testament of Orpheus written by a Jewish individual. You would see them practicing mystery cult rites. Philo talks about the Therapeutae, who had essentially created something analogous to a mystery cult. He says near Alexandria. So, these people are part of the thick lived religious context of their day, and it's an overwhelmingly Hellenic context in which gods and spirits are mixed together, and in which religions are competing, yes, but they are also being joined, and there's a sort of universalism going on, that there's a true divine reality behind all the faces of the gods sort of movement, which we see in the Nicene Preacher.
Yes.
So Jews are part of that movement, and yeah, you can have all different kinds of Judaism. You can have all different kinds of Orphic belief, but structurally, yeah, it's very similar. Where Orphic belief, you have a translocal cult with local domestic type rituals performed by religious experts who are reading books and who are experts in a certain kind of literature. Well, that very much describes many different forms of Judaism and Christianity. And so if you're thinking of models for religion, then the Orphic type of cult movement really does actually help you to organize your own religious cult. And although it's almost impossible to dogmatically claim that there's a genetic connection between two cult movements, it's very, very likely and a very good hypothesis that
Sure.
that's simply what happened. And it's what happens today.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Nassim preacher. I think this is such a good example of a Christian movement that is sort of branching out and pointing to things that are related to Jesus, such as Edis. Um, can you? I'm trying to think of how I want to pose this question. Can you explain to us like someone like the Nassim preacher? How what do you think the likelihood of this being a popular idea for someone like the Nassim preacher to identify Jesus with someone like Addis, for example?
Well, there's different strokes for different folks, but in Alexandria, we have first of all Clement of Alexandria in his Protrepticus more or less conforming Christ to Orpheus, and that Christ is the new Orpheus singing the new song of salvation. That's very much his approach.
Wow.
The Nicene preacher has an even more strongly mixed type of approach where he can say that, hymns like a hymn to Attis, the Phrygian deity, that are created by poets who aren't Christians, they are unknowingly singing the glories of Christ. And what the Nicene preacher is able to do is to say, systematically go through the religious literature of other people and to say, well, unconsciously, you know, they were speaking of Christ and they didn't know it. And all these epithets for these other gods and all these various forms of other gods, that's really just a way of talking about Christ, who is the universal deity, the child of the human, and the perfect human, as they like to say. So yes, but then again, as today there were, I wouldn't say fundamentalists, but there were also much more rigid expressions of religion,
Yeah.
where you have Tatian, for instance, saying that he was once, before he became a Christian, initiated into a whole series of mystery cults. And then when he became a Christian, he became sort of a dogmatic firebrand. And he used all the tools and rhetoric of Greek and Hellenic culture in order to blast that culture, or what
Yeah.
he thought was that culture, which also included the mystery cults. And so, yeah, you've got a whole range of responses, just as you do today for people searching for the truth.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because you got with the Nassim preacher him, you got him. He's basically comparing him to Osiris and Orpheus and even Pan with the player of the flute. Mentioned that this pine tree thing with Attis, and I was actually reading James Frazier who connects this pine tree thing with a ritual in Egypt with Osiris, and they apparently cut out a pine tree and molded it into an image of Osiris, kept it for a year, and then burned it the next year. But that so I that's those I'm not even adding Christianity to that. I'm just saying those are two I noticed between Attis and Osiris. Now, when I look at the text of Christianity, though, and I look at this Eucharist, you have this idea of eating the flesh, which is the bread, and drinking the wine, which is the blood. And I can't help but to think of in the mysteries and the Lucius, you have the idea of Demeter and of Dionysus. But I think the big thing is when I look at him and Attis, I'm so tempted to jump on this parallelomania mi- mindset, and I'm guilty of this. I do this all the time because there's this idea of the Day of Blood for Attis. He has this. It's the Great Mother festival, I think it's called, where there's the Day of Blood, and then 3 days after that is the Day of Cleansing, and it's in right around the same time as Easter. It's in the springtime, the equinoxes, and you're like, what is there a connection? Is it a coincidence? What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I talk about the so-called Holy Week for Cybele and Attis in the lectures.
Yeah, go
And
deep into that.
so I won't say much about that,
Sure.
but I give you the whole context. It's a distinctly Roman, at least what we know about it today, is a distinctly Roman variant set up by Claudius and Antoninus, in which, yes, there was basically a Holy Week for Attis, in which there was a day of blood, followed by a day of rejoicing, and ending by a day of cleansing. And all this, yes, overlapped exactly with what later became Holy Week for Christians.
Wow.
It was a spring festival in which you celebrated the birth and renewal of a deity, and Attis was symbolized by a pine tree, which is evergreen and everlasting. So, yeah, I mean, again, you can't make facile genetic connections and say this led to this, but I think after getting yourself fully educated in the material, and that's the difference between Parallelomania and what we're doing in the course. The course says,
Right.
let's just look at other religions as other religions. And then at the end, after we've gotten all this education and this information, then at the end of it, we talk about Christianity and what may or may not have happened. And it's important to note that it is all a historical reconstruction. And but hopefully, when we've gathered all the data in a cautious and safe and responsible way, without letting Christianity be the sort of guiding light, which is
Yeah.
very hard for people. What Parallelomania, the reason why Parallelomania is a disease
Sure.
is because it prioritizes Christianity.
Yeah.
And then goes out and looks at things in other ancient religions and myths that sort of look like Christianity.
Right.
And that's a completely wrong method,
I agree.
because it makes Christianity call the shots, as it were. And what true, I think, education is, and what I'm trying to do through the course, is to say, whether or not you came out of Christianity or not, whether or not you're trying to come out of Christianity, whether or not you just want to learn more, take off your Christianity hat, okay, and just enter into a new world as fresh as you can, like a newborn babe. And that is admittedly, you're not able to do that fully, but it's a scholarly practice that everyone should try out. And it's the difference between someone just looking at parallels and someone doing the real hearty, meaty kind of scholarship that really does enable us to make the sorts of historical judgments that we need to make. It's really not about whether any of these religions are legitimate or not. It's really about just curiosity and the wonder of being human and the wonder of learning more about the divine and the divine world. And that's my approach, and that's why I recommend the course for everybody. And obviously, if you take the course, I'd obviously love everyone here to consider joining my YouTube channel as well, or that is subscribing to my YouTube channel and joining my Patreon, where you can get much more information. And if you join at a particular tier and the Patreon, you can send me questions anytime if you want to follow up with anything. I think that's really important for all of you. This is just a point of beginning. And hopefully, if we do this right, there'll be many, many courses to come.
Let me just say this then. Guys, the link is in the description. Check. I'm telling you guys, I helped edit these videos with Derek, and it is priceless how much information is in here. Like I said, in this little 20-minute segment, we just scratched the surface. There is hours to go. And link is in the description. And you have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over you.
Hey kid, don't ever let them get inside your head. They'll tell you what to do in life instead of everything you know that you could get.